What if I told you that most people don't lose their mobility because of age, but because they're told to stop trying? Imagine hearing this. You'll never walk again. Not because your body gave up, but because someone else decided for you. That's exactly what happened to my patient Margaret. 72 years old. One bad fall in her bathroom, one devastating diagnosis, permanent immobility. For her, it wasn't just a medical verdict, it felt like a prison sentence. A future of wheelchairs, constant dependence, and quietly fading away. But here's the part they never expected. Margaret didn't listen. As a doctor, I've witnessed firsthand how the right knowledge, the right habits, and a fighting spirit can defy even the harshest predictions. Science tells us that after 60, we can lose up to 3% of muscle mass each year if we stay inactive. Yet small, deliberate actions can reverse that decline. Margaret's journey from a hospital bed back to her garden path wasn't a miracle. It was a choice to reclaim her steps, her dignity, her life. Today, I'm going to share with you exactly how she did it. No expensive treatments, no false promises, just real practical strategies you can apply today to protect your independence and strengthen your body no matter your age. If you care about staying active, living fully, and proving that age is not a limitation, you need to hear this story. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Doctor for Seniors, and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been told that something was just old age when you knew it wasn't? Your health is your greatest wealth, and it's never too late to fight for it. Part 1. The fall that changed everything. Margaret had always been careful. She wasn't reckless, she didn't take risks. Like many women in their 70s, she lived a quiet, routine life. Every morning, she'd brew her tea, tend to her garden, and take slow, steady walks around her neighborhood. She knew her bones weren't what they used to be. She'd heard the warnings about osteoporosis, had even taken her calcium supplements. But in her mind, she was still in control. Until that morning. It was a Tuesday, nothing unusual. She stepped into the bathroom as she had thousands of times before, but this time her foot met a small puddle of water left unnoticed near the sink. In an instant, her body betrayed her. One slip, one fall. A sharp, unforgiving crack echoed through the tiny room. Margaret lay on the cold tile floor, breathless, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't move her left leg. Pain shot through her hip like fire, and in that moment, a terrifying thought settled in. Is this how it ends for me? At the hospital, the diagnosis came quickly. A fractured pelvis, severe osteoporosis. The doctor's words were clinical, but the message was clear. At your age, recovery will be extremely difficult. You may never walk independently again. It was a statement, not a discussion. The kind of cold verdict that turns patients into statistics. Margaret felt herself shrink, not just physically, but emotionally. In that sterile hospital bed, she wasn't a vibrant woman who loved her garden and cherished Sunday brunches with her grandchildren. She became a number, an elderly woman with brittle bones, another case of age-related decline. Research shows that adults over 65 face a 5 to 8 times higher risk of hip fractures due to osteoporosis, and nearly 20% of them will lose their mobility permanently after such injuries. These aren't just numbers. They represent lives changed, routines shattered, and independence stolen in a heartbeat. Margaret's family was supportive, but even they started making quiet arrangements, installing handrails, discussing wheelchair access, assuming her active life was over. She felt invisible, discarded, as if aging had sealed her fate before she had a say in it. But here's what most people don't realize. A fall doesn't just break bones, it breaks confidence. It plants a seed of fear that grows with every cautious step until walking itself becomes an act of hesitation. For many seniors, the real battle after a fall isn't physical, it's psychological. I remember another patient, George, a retired firefighter, who once told me, "Doc, I wasn't afraid of fire, but after my fall, I was terrified of my own feet." That fear is paralyzing. For Margaret, each passing day in the hospital felt like confirmation of the doctor's grim prediction. Physical therapy sessions were painful, discouraging. Progress was slow. The nurses were kind, but even their words hinted at resignation. "At least you're safe here," they'd say. But safe wasn't living. Safe wasn't walking through her rose garden or holding her great-granddaughter's hand on a stroll. And then one afternoon, everything changed. An old friend visited, a woman named Eleanor, who herself had battled a broken hip at 70. Eleanor looked Margaret straight in the eye and said something simple yet powerful. "Don't let them bury you before you're gone." That sentence hit harder than the fall. Eleanor shared her own journey, how she'd been given the same prognosis, how she'd started with tiny painful movements in bed, refusing to let her body atrophy. She talked about small victories, lifting her leg an inch, standing for 5 seconds without support, celebrating every tiny milestone as a rebellion against aging's expectations. Margaret listened. For the first time since her fall, she saw a different future. This wasn't about defying medical advice with blind optimism. It was about reclaiming agency, understanding that bones heal, and while they may never be as strong as before, the human spirit has no such limits. The fall had changed everything. Yes, it had taken her down, but it also awakened a choice: surrender or fight back. What most people don't realize is that mobility isn't lost overnight, and it isn't regained overnight either. It's built or rebuilt one small, consistent effort at a time. Studies have shown that seniors who engage in just 30 minutes of targeted rehabilitation exercises daily significantly improve their balance, strength, and confidence, even after severe fractures. Margaret's journey was far from over, but that moment lying in her hospital bed, hearing Eleanor's story, marked the true turning point. She realized the fall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one she would write herself. Part 2, the moment of defiance. For many people, recovery ends the moment a doctor says the words, "You'll never walk again." Not because their bodies give up, but because their hope does. That was the battle Margaret faced. Not just against her broken pelvis or brittle bones, but against an invisible, heavier weight: resignation. Every time a nurse adjusted her bed, every time her walker stood untouched in the corner, it whispered the same lie: "You're too old for this fight." Studies show that after a major injury, seniors are at risk of developing what's called learned helplessness. It's not weakness, it's human nature. When told repeatedly that recovery is unlikely, many stop trying altogether. Muscles weaken, balance fades, and before long, the prediction becomes reality, not because it was inevitable, but because it was accepted. Margaret was teetering on that edge. And then Eleanor walked into her hospital room. Eleanor wasn't a doctor. She wasn't there in a white coat with test results. She was an old friend, barely 5 feet tall, but with a presence that filled the room. Once a nurse, always a nurse, she had that tone of voice that made you sit up straighter, whether you wanted to or not. She pulled a chair close, leaned in, and said, "You don't need to run a marathon, but you do need to fight for your steps." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't poetic, but it cut through the fog in Margaret's mind like a beam of light. Eleanor then shared her own story. 2 years earlier, she too had suffered a severe hip fracture. The doctors had painted the same bleak picture, but Eleanor refused to let a single fall define the rest of her life. "I started with 5 seconds," she said. 5 seconds standing without holding on to anything. That was my marathon that day. Margaret listened, eyes wide. For the first time since her accident, she wasn't hearing about limitations. She was hearing about possibilities, small, humble victories that piece by piece rebuild a life. Eleanor spoke of the little things no one tells you. The frustration of lifting your leg an inch off the bed. The trembling in your hands as you push yourself up from a chair. The triumph of walking 5 steps across a room without assistance. Not milestones anyone else would notice, but battles won in silence. That visit changed everything. Margaret realized recovery wasn't about going back to who she was before. It was about becoming stronger than she thought possible now. Not for anyone else, but for herself. That night alone in her hospital room, she made a decision. A quiet promise to herself: "I'm not done yet." The very next morning when the physical therapist came in, Margaret didn't wait to be asked. She requested to sit up. It was excruciating. Every muscle protested, but she did it. 10 minutes became 15. Sitting turned into shifting her weight. Shifting her weight became standing, even if only for seconds at a time. Each day brought a new challenge, and each time she reminded herself of Eleanor's words: "Fight for your steps." It wasn't glamorous. There were setbacks, days when she felt like giving up, but every small victory fueled the next. Here's what science tells us according to the National Institute on Aging. Even simple resistance exercises and balance training can significantly reduce the risk of future falls and improve overall mobility in older adults. Recovery is not an age-limited privilege. It's a process that responds to consistency no matter how old you are. Margaret's turning point wasn't a grand event. It was a conversation, a choice. And that choice set her on a path of small, deliberate defiance against the expectations placed upon her. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time since her fall, Margaret wasn't losing. She was fighting back. Part 3, Small Steps, Big Wins. Most people believe recovery happens in grand leaps. One day you're in a wheelchair, the next you're walking again. But the truth is, real healing is built on tiny, almost invisible steps. For Margaret, every inch forward felt like a victory. After Eleanor's visit, she didn't wake up with a sudden surge of strength. What she had was far more powerful determination. The first task was simple on paper, but monumental in practice, sitting up in bed without assistance. It sounds small, doesn't it? But for someone who had lost confidence in her own body, it was like scaling a mountain. The muscles in her core trembled. Her arms shook as they pushed against the mattress. Sweat beaded on her forehead. But she did it. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15. That's how it began. Margaret's physical therapist introduced short targeted routines, 5 to 10 minutes a day of gentle movements. Simple leg lifts, seated marches, ankle circles. Exercises designed not to overwhelm but to awaken. Research from the Journal of Geriatric Physical Therapy shows that even 10 minutes of daily mobility exercises can significantly improve strength and reduce fall risk in seniors over 65. She stuck to it religiously. Her kitchen counter became her balance bar. Every morning she'd hold on, gently practicing, standing on one leg, shifting her weight, bending her knees. What started as seconds became minutes. "Good morning, fighters," she'd whisper to her legs. But Margaret knew it wasn't just about movement. Bones need building blocks. She worked with a nutritionist to fine-tune her diet. Gone were the sugary snacks and processed foods that crept into her routine. Instead, she focused on lean proteins like grilled salmon and eggs rich in amino acids to rebuild muscle. She added leafy greens, almonds, and fortified dairy to boost calcium and vitamin D, essential for bone health. Inflammation was her quiet enemy. To fight it, she embraced foods with anti-inflammatory power, turmeric spiced soups, berries bursting with antioxidants, and olive oil drizzled over her salads. Every meal became part of her recovery plan, but physical strength was only half the battle. Margaret had to rebuild her mind's trust in her own body. Each morning before her exercises, she practiced deep belly breathing, slow inhales through her nose, long exhales through pursed lips. This calmed her nerves and reduced anxiety, a practice backed by the National Institutes of Health, which highlights deep breathing as an effective way to lower blood pressure and reduce stress in older adults. She also tried short guided meditations focusing on visualization. She'd close her eyes and picture herself walking through her garden, feeling the earth beneath her feet, smelling the roses. These mental rehearsals helped bridge the gap between fear and action. The progress wasn't always linear. There were days when fatigue won, days when pain whispered doubts. But Margaret had learned something vital. Recovery is not about perfection. It's about persistence. 3 months after her fall, something remarkable happened. For the first time, she walked across her living room without a walker. She used her hands to steady herself on furniture, but those were her steps. Unassisted, unapologetic, hers. The smile on her face that day could have lit up the entire neighborhood. Her family cried. The physical therapist clapped. Margaret. She simply said, "One step at a time. That's how we come back to life." What made her success possible wasn't a secret formula. It was the power of small, consistent habits. Daily exercises, thoughtful nutrition, mindful breathing. Little choices repeated with care that accumulated into a transformation. By the 6-month mark, Margaret was not only walking around her home, but also tending to her beloved garden again. Slowly, carefully, but with the same hands that once feared falling. Her journey is proof of a simple, profound truth. In the battle for mobility, small steps are never small victories. Part 4, the turning point. Every recovery has a moment where everything shifts. It's not always dramatic. There's no swelling music or standing ovation. But for the person living it, it feels like the world has opened up again. For Margaret, that moment came 6 months after her fall. In the early days, walking from her bed to the bathroom felt like running a marathon. Each step was cautious, calculated, filled with fear. The walker was her constant companion, the walls her safety net. She measured progress in inches, not miles. But something had changed over those 6 months. Slowly, quietly, she had been rebuilding herself. One muscle at a time, one breath at a time. The daily exercises, the anti-inflammatory meals, the breathing routines. They had all been adding up brick by brick to create a foundation strong enough to stand on. One crisp spring morning, Margaret stood at the bottom of her staircase. For the first time in half a year, she looked up not with dread, but with quiet determination. 3 steps, that's all she aimed for. Her hands found the railing, her right foot lifted. The muscles in her thigh quivered but held firm. She placed her foot on the first step, then the next, and the next. 3 steps, no assistance, no applause, just the soft sound of her breath steady and calm. At the top she paused, not from exhaustion but from awe. In that simple, quiet moment, she realized something profound. She wasn't just walking again, she was walking back into her life. Margaret's story is not unique. In fact, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC structured exercise and mobility programs can reduce the risk of disability by up to 40% in older adults recovering from falls. Yet so many never reach this point, not because they can't, but because they stop trying before the breakthrough comes. Margaret didn't stop. Her turning point wasn't a miracle. It was the natural result of months of small, intentional victories. By week 26, she could walk the full length of her home without a walker. By week 30, she was tending to her rose bushes again, kneeling carefully, feeling the soil beneath her fingers, reconnecting with a part of her life she feared lost. One afternoon, her grandson came to visit. The same boy who used to run to help her out of chairs was now watching in amazement as Margaret walked toward him, unaided arms open for a hug. "Grandma, you're walking," he exclaimed. Margaret smiled and said softly, "Not just walking, sweetheart, I'm coming back." Those words stayed with me. As her doctor, I had seen the x-rays tracked her therapy progress, adjusted her treatment. But nothing was more powerful than seeing her reclaim the simple joys, setting the table herself, standing by the stove, stirring her favorite soup, walking to her mailbox with steady steps. Every small task was now a symbol of freedom. What makes stories like Margaret's so important is the reminder they bring: aging is inevitable. Decline is not. Yes, bones grow brittle, muscles weaken, but the body's capacity to heal, to adapt, remains extraordinary when met with patience and persistence. Margaret's turning point teaches us a valuable lesson. It's not about erasing age. It's about embracing progress, no matter how small, and understanding that each step forward is a step toward independence. For anyone watching this wondering if their own recovery is possible, let me tell you this. If Margaret can rebuild her life one careful step at a time, so can you. Her story isn't rare because of luck. It's rare because she refused to stop. Margaret's story isn't extraordinary because of luck. It's extraordinary because she didn't stop when others would have. Most people give up too soon, not because they're weak, but because they're told it's over. But here's the truth. Your body listens to your mind. If you tell it to surrender, it will. But if you tell it to keep fighting even quietly, miracles can happen. Not in giant leaps, but in small, determined steps. So if this story touched your heart, I ask you to share it. Someone you care about might be standing at the edge of giving up, and they need this reminder today. And if you found hope here, remember, if this helped you, don't forget to subscribe. Your health is your greatest wealth.